Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back in today to talk about Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku, episode number 6. This episode is titled Heart and Reason. And let me tell you, in this episode, they do a lot of heart and reasoning. I mean, it's mostly Sagiri, but Gabimaru has a moment here and there too, but there's just a lot of heartfelt reason in this chapter. This episode, right? I've just done too many chapter reviews of manga here lately, and I wanted to get back into an episode. So, as you guys can probably tell if you're watching this near the release date, it has been about 7 months since this episode originally came out. And as with most things on the channel, life got ahead of me, and I am very behind on almost everything. But that is fine, because I am trying to catch up on almost everything, and to do that, we are going all the way back to this episode review of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku, episode 6, like I said earlier. So, yeah, this is a fine enough episode. One thing I really like about it is that it covers the manga almost perfectly throughout. I mean, I went back and read all the chapters that this episode covers, and it really does a great job of just honing in and focusing on nearly everything that happened, right? But to get into that, we need to talk about what happened last time on Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku. And last time it was a big conflict, not only between Genji and Sagiri, who were on the opposite sides of, hey, Sagiri, you should go back to the mainland. A woman like you has no right to be on this island, right? You're just want to get in our way. That was sort of Genji's point of view. And Sagiri was coming through with her resolve, saying that, no, I'm going to stay on this island. And as they were having this big confrontation, Rokuta finally came up behind Sagiri and took a massive chunk right out of the side of Genji, right? And this episode, we of course open up with the opening of the show, Work by Rino Shina and Millennium Parade. But once that great opening, like I said, it's been about 7 months since this episode originally came out, and since this opening debuted, and this is just an amazing opening through and through. I mean, the animation's great, I just love the song. This is just one of those anime openings that honestly don't think you can go wrong with, right? But of course, after the opening happens, we start the actual episode proper with a few just flashbacks, I guess, to a young Rokuta, right? Of course, a convicted criminal who just took a chunk out of Genji is standing there, and we sort of see his younger days, right? And we sort of see some flashbacks of him just, like, throwing rocks at things, and over time just, like, being hungry, wanting to play, and eventually he plays and ends up killing a lot of people, including his family, and pretty much everybody in his village, right? But as we sort of cut out from this whole flashback, we cut to the present where Genji has just gotten a chunk taken out of him. He pushes Sagiri back, so of course she won't get mauled like he just did. And Rokuta pretty much picks him up and just throws him back, and he sort of just hits a tree, and you can tell that he's not looking good, right? And spoiler, he ends up dying, so yeah, he's definitely not doing too good, right? And at this point, Sagiri just, like, runs up to where he's up against a tree, and she's like, oh, Genji, like, what's going on? Like, we need to get you all bandaged up. I mean, you can survive this. But Genji's just like, hey, Sagiri, it is way too late for me. You just need to get up, and you need to run. There is nothing you can do to save me. And as this happens, Rokuta just picks up a tree out of nowhere, and he just throws it at these two sitting here, but as it comes in, Gabimaru comes in and smashes him against the face before he can get to Sagiri and Genji, and just, like, sends him flying, like, destroying a whole bunch of more trees. As we'll see throughout this episode, the ecosystem of this island isn't doing too well. So Gabimaru comes in, and he makes a note of how Rokuta is looking, and he's just like, man, this guy has the eyes of a predator, right? Like, he can tell everything that's going on here, and that Rokuta is not somebody he wants to mess with at all. And as soon as he realizes this, Rokuta just stands back up, and Gabimaru is just like, oh my gosh, that was one of my strongest kicks I could have managed, right? How is he able to get up after feeling something like that? Like, he's got way more strength than any ninja of the Igakawari village could even have, just being able to realize that. At this point, he also remembers back to his young days of whenever he was a shinobi, and the village leader was often telling him, like, hey, here's the 9th rule of being a shinobi. Pay attention to everything around you. That's pretty much what the rule is. I think it's a little funny because it's like, okay, here's rule 9 of the Shinobi School, right? Pay attention to your surroundings and come up with a counterattack, right? I feel like for a lot of people, that doesn't need to be a rule. That's just like common sense, but it's rule 9, so sure, we'll roll for that, but at this point, Rokuta just picks up an arch tree and just swings at Gabimaru, Sagiri, and Genji's way, right? The whole party sort of runs out of there Gabimaru runs out as Sagiri stays by Genji's side. And he goes over to Yuzuriha and Senta, who are, of course, still here, and says, like, hey, Yuzuriha, like, can you help me out here? Like, I know you're a ninja, too. You've got to have some helpful ninjutsu somewhere. But pretty much Yuzuriha just says, no, I'm not feeling it. Like, she provides a little bit of funny comic relief, but that's really all there is to it. There's not really a whole lot to say on that part, right? But as that happens, Gabimaru's is like, alright, you aren't helpful at all. At this point, he uses one of his Nimpo attacks, which is Stone Storm. Now, this is a pretty cool attack in my opinion, because what he does is Gabimaru just like leaps onto a tree and then jumps down into the ground. And by doing this, he sort of makes a divot in the ground and a bunch of clumps of dirt and stone fly up. And then he just does a big swing kick and kicks all of these stones in a storm towards Rokuta. So he uses this Nimpo and just swings at him and then follows that up directly with another Nimpo Unformed Blade, in which he takes off his like cloth belt he has on and pretty much just swings it at Rokuta as a way of a sword, right? And Gabimaru's just like, oh man, none of this is working. Like, he's just too powerful. What am I supposed to do here? At this point, we cut over to Genji and Sagiri, where the two of them are having a bigger heartfelt moment, right? The whole sort of crux of this is that Sagiri is very, like, caring for Genji, like, hey, Genji, we gotta get you out of here, like, you can still survive this if we act quickly, right? And Genji's just like, no, we can't. And he thinks back to earlier whenever Sagiri's making such a big deal of, hey, I'm gonna stay on this island. And he thinks to her now as almost a completely different person who is saying, like, hey, we need to get you out of here, you can survive. And he sort of thinks of Sagiri as, like, embodying both traits of a female and a man, sort of like the more emotional side of a female and a more sturdy and courageous side of a man, pretty much saying that, like, hey, you embody the path of the middle way. And it's like, this is your conviction, right? And pretty much this whole thing ends off with Genji finally handing over his sword, pretty much saying that, hey, this is the sword of a true warrior, and the blade is a warrior's soul, and pretty much hands over his blade to Sagiri and says, now, you need to go beat Rokuta, and he officially calls her Yamada Asaimon Sagiri, right? So, this is very interesting to me because, of course, this is trying to be like a bigger moment here, showing that Genji has come to realize his ways in the last part of the episode. And that was one of the worst parts of initial Jigokuraku, is just how much of like a womanizer Genji is. Not woman, that's like the wrong word, but sort of how he doesn't see that women have potential, right? It's really weird, and it's not really my favorite portrayal, but it sort of all queers up here in a way. So it is very nice to see how Genji does this, right? Hand off a sword saying like, hey, you're a Yamada Asaimon, go out there, beat up Rokuta, I know you can do it, right? And at this point, we cut back over to the fight with Gabimaru and Rokuta, as the two of them are just fighting, and Gabimaru is really just questioning everything going on here. So he's like, I can't figure out a way to beat Rokuta. And he sort of imagines like, hey, if I can get in close to him using Aesthetic Blaze, which is where he sets his body on fire, he's like, I can maybe get up to him and set him on fire. But then he just has an image of him just being crushed under the sheer weight of him. And he's just like, man, I don't know if I can actually do this even so. So at that point, he's just like, oh man, and Rokuta comes in to almost hit Gabimaru, but before he can get there, one of his fingers gets chopped off, and of course this is Sagiri, who has come in to be a tag team with Gabimaru, pretty much, and the two of them just talk for a second like, hey, what is our plan here, before eventually saying that, hey, let's fight together, right? Well, we find out what their plan actually is. The only way they're going to be able to actually beat Rokuta is by slicing off his head in one fell swoop, right? And to be able to do that, Gabimaru suggests that Sagiri cut the back of his legs and make him kneel on the ground so his head will be exposed down low, where Sagiri can cut it off in one clean shot, right? And Gabimaru pretty much just says, like, hey, you can do it, Sagiri, because Sagiri has a little bit of doubt in her actions, right? So Gabimaru just says, like, you can do it. And Sagiri goes back around. Gabimaru makes a diversion, and Sagiri goes and tries to cut one of the back of his legs, but she just can't, right? And she's like, all right, stay calm, feel all of these emotions, get my reasoning all together, and tries again, but there's just no luck. They can't do anything about it. So Gabimaru and Sagiri temporarily retreat, and while this retreat is going on, Rokuta starts to get up and sort of starts to cry in a way, right? And just create a big tantrum, mainly just saying like, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. So of course, yeah, this would be one of Rokuta's main observations, is that he's just like a brute, and he's like, whenever I'm hungry, I need to eat, and eating sort of makes him stronger because he needs to get food, right? So it makes sense enough. So at this point, he's just like, eat, and he gets a good hit on Gabimaru, because Gabimaru doesn't have the reaction time, because at this point, his leg isn't working too well, right? As he tries to get up, like, his leg is really strained, and he just can't move it so well, and while he's realizing this, Rokuta just comes down and swings over top of him and just, like, completely knocks him out. So Gabimaru is not quite down for the count, but he's not doing too well at all, right? And at this point, Sagiri starts to have this resolve, and she's just like, oh gosh, what's going on here? And as Gabimaru starts to get up, he just realizes, like, man, I can't move. It's almost like all my energy is sapped out of me. And as he sees the looming fist of Rokuta coming towards him, Sagiri steps up and is fending off all of the strikes with her own blade, right? So as he comes out of his hand, she swats it away with her sword and is just showing a lot of her own resolve. At this point, we cut over to Senta and Yuzuriha, who are, of course, watching the fight, and Senta brings up a whole note of the whole Yamada-Asaemon ranking system, right? And he just says that Sagiri is rank 12, but she is way better than that. Pretty much the whole ranking system is based on who is the next in line to become the actual leader of the Yamada-Asaemons, and of course, because she's a woman, she's not as good, yada yada yada, so she is ranked very low, but she has awesome sword skills. And of course, the dying Genji on a tree also looks at this and says, whenever Sagiri has her heart aligned with her goals, she is a first-rate swordsman. And we see this as Sagiri is just using these back and forth, and eventually she makes Rokuta fall on the ground, right? And at this point, she goes over to try to cut him, but before she can, he just gets back up, and Rokuta just starts jumping around again, right? But at this point, Gabimaru says, wait, I've got a great idea. If we need to get him on the ground, well, I have something that just might work. And as he sort of, like, leaves on that, like, big note, we end up getting the break in the episode, which comes very evenly in the episode. I think the first part of the episode had, like, 23 minutes or so, and the last part of the episode had, like, 10, or 13 and 10, so altogether, that is a very good split for where the break is in the episode. And also, that's the first page of my notes. So at this point, he's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. But before he can do that, he starts to light his body on fire. And Yuzuriha, who's with Senta, just says, oh god, we have to run now. Because of course she catches on to what Gabimaru is going to do. So pretty much what Gabimaru does is he uses a bunch of his Nimpo attacks. But, for instance, he uses Nimpo Stone Storm, but he uses it in Aesthetic Blaze mode. So, he lights his body on fire with Aesthetic Blaze, and uses the same Stone Storm move he used earlier, so jumping into a tree, jumping down, getting a bunch of rocks up in the air, and pretty much throwing them like pocket sand, but they're set on fire, so of course they go and hit trees, and these easily combustible trees start to set on fire. He does this with a lot of his other Nimpo moves, such as Zephyr Weave, which is pretty much where he sort of just, like, breathes fire out in a cone, or it may be something like where he gets, like, a rock projectile and blows it out, but he pretty much blows fire breath out. So he uses Nimpo Zephyr Wave, Aesthetic Blaze mode. He also uses Nimpo Grand Crag, Aesthetic Blaze mode, and also Nimpo Quilt of Thorns, Aesthetic Blaze mode. So he uses all of these, and yeah, they create a forest fire, like, plain and simple. This entire forest starts engulfing in flames, and we get a narrator here who pretty much tells us what's going on. Pretty much what Gabimaru is trying to do is he is trying to get Rokuta to get a carbon monoxide poisoning, right? So all of the smoke from sap and all of these very dry trees is going to make all of the smog and smoke raise towards the top. And Rokuta is a really big guy. I mean, he's probably 10, 12, 14 foot tall. So he is a big dude. So he'll be up where all of the smoke is, and he won't be able to breathe it in, and all of his hunger and crying and everything is going to make him inhale smoke faster, and of course that'll attach carbon monoxide to his blood, and yeah, he will fall on the ground. And we see that this works perfectly, as Rokuta falls to the ground and just like starts coughing and everything, and Gabimaru is down for the count at this point. Like, he's just sitting down like, I don't know if I can take any of this anymore. But of course, Sagiri, who's here, walks up to Rokuta, and he's ready to chop off Rokuta's head. And as he goes down to, or she goes down to sort of start to swing her sword, Rokuta tries to stick a hand out towards her, but Gabimaru gets in the way, blocks it, and at this point we have a really awesome scene where Sagiri grabs a sword and just brings it down and goes and chops Rokuta's head off, like, queenly done. But we don't actually see this moment because we get more of a Rokuta flashback, because we see that Rokuta as a child was really just a big child. All he did was eat, and he wanted to play, and sadly all of that eating and playing led to him eating and playing with his own family and killing them. So that was pretty much his entire life, is he led this destructive path. And at this point, right before Rokuta's head gets chopped off, we see him look at Sagiri and his sword, and he just starts to weep some more, right? As whenever we come back to the present, we see that, her name's Sagiri, I don't know why I just blanked on that, is holding the head of Rokuta, and is just cradling it in her arms, and she's like, don't worry, everybody that hated you is dead, and you are now dead yourself. Like, sort of caressing him like a baby, pretty much, and caressing that severed head. But at this point, Gabimaru's like, alright, Rokuta's done, we won this battle, but the entire forest is on fire, and we have to leave this area now. Like, we have to get out of here. And as they start to run, Sagiri looks over to where Genji is, and of course, Genji is dead on the tree. And what I didn't mention earlier is that whenever Genji had that moment of talking about how Sagiri is good with a blade, we sort of saw him start to slump over at that point, showing that, yeah, that was probably one of his last thoughts. But yeah, so Sagiri sees this and sees the dead Genji, whose body's being engulfed in flames, but Gabimaru eventually just snaps around and just says, like, hey Sagiri, we have to run, and they start running out of the forest and getting on their way, right? And as they just start running, Sagiri sort of has this moment of resolve again, Heart and Resolve as the episode's titled, and sort of comes to terms with everything that happened and everything that she's done, and yeah, just comes to terms with it. And at this point, we sort of cut away to all of the monsters of the island walking towards the flames, because of course, Gabimaru and Sagiri are a little bit out of where that big fire was. This is probably, if I had to guess, like 10-15 minutes after the fact, because they're a pretty good way away from the fire, and all the Titan creatures are just walking towards the fire. And Gabimaru pretty much just makes a note of, how weird is that they're all walking towards the fire? You would think that creatures would be smart enough not to go near fire and run away from it. Like, this island definitely isn't normal. Of course, if we didn't know that, that's a little weird. But he pretty much talks about how if they want to find the elixir of life, they probably have to go more into the center of the island, which is all of where the creature titans came from. And pretty much says that him and Sagiri need to run that way, right? So as they're running along the road, both Sagiri and Gabimaru sort of showed resolving, and Gabimaru says, like, hey, no matter what happens, I'm going to find this elixir because I want to find it and get back to my wife, showing his resolve. And then he asks Sagiri, like, hey, are you all good? And she's like, yes, I am. But he's like, what do you think about all of your partners who are on this island who may not be as fortunate as us to be as strong, right? But she says that, no, they are all fine, and I know that. So as we get a cut to, of course, Nurgai and is it Tendo? No, it's not Tendo. It's, oh man, I forget what his name is. But Nurgai and her companion, her Yamada Simon. I know this name. It's Tenchi. No, it's not Tenchi. It's something like that. Oh, I just had it. Tenza. It's Tenza. Tenza's his name. So those two, and then Yuichi and his guy. So I'm sorry, I'm forgetting names at this point. But so she pretty much thinks about them and just says no, that she's not worried about them. And pretty much Gudmar says, but for once in our lives, both our interests have aligned to get off this island and get home safe. At this point, they keep just running, and they eventually see Zuriha and Cinta, who of course have run, and the two of them are sort of looking down at something, very shocked, right? And Gabimar and Sagiri run up to him, and Gabimar makes a little bit of note of, hey, Sagiri, weren't you supposed to be, or hey, Zuriha, weren't you supposed to be helping us? But before he can sort of get all of that out, he looks down to what Zuriha and Cinta were both looking at, and they see a ruined village down below. And Cinta makes a note of, hey, if this island is supposed to be Shinsekyo, well, hermits live on that island. Maybe there's hermits down in this village below. And we sort of cut at that point to a whole nother part of the chapter, as we see both Asachobe and Toma, the two best brothers in this show. I mean, I think they're the only brothers we know about in this show, but they're a great pair of brothers. And they're sort of talking after beating up a lot of the island's creatures. And we see that Ozza is even just drinking the blood out of a head of one, because of course Ozza's just crazy, but he's a bandit king, so what can you say about it, right? But as they're talking, Toma brings up this fact again of like, hey, if this is Shinsenkyo, hermits are supposed to be on Shinsenkyo, not actual just random creatures like we're seeing, right? And the two of them talk for a second, but eventually Oz is just like, hey, I sense something out there, so two of them start running, and as they are running, they come to this big, like, unnatural creation. It almost looks like some brick housework, but it's all grown over and really weird, and on top of this are two people sitting. We see that one of them is, like, taking a bite out of an apple, and they go to it, and they start just eating this apple, and then we see there's two of them here. And we just see that these two women are making out on top of this weird structure as Ozza and Toma run up on them, right? And yeah, these two are just going at it. Like, they're just making out and, like, just doing it. But eventually, as Toma and Ozza run up and they see them, the two women look over and look really pissed and really upset at both Ozza and Toma. And that is where we end the episode, with these two sort of looking down like, what's going on here? I mean, they don't say anything, they just do this really disturbing look, but that is where this episode ends. Now, of course, after that, we have the ending, which is Kamahate by Uru. It's a fine ending, as normal. A few months after, of course, hearing it for the first time and not thinking about it since, the ending does work well, because it sort of calms down the show for as wild as it can be at points. But this is just a great episode all in all. It pretty much covers chapters 13 to about 16 and a half perfectly, right? So chapter 13 is the beginning of the Battle of Rokuta, and of course seeing pretty much the end of Genji, and then 14 and 15 sort of hold the rest of that battle with Rokuta, and then 16 is of course running through the woods, meeting up with Yuzuriha and Cinta, and then of course after that point seeing what Ozza and Toma are up to. This is a very good episode. Like I said, it covers almost everything perfectly, and the animation by Mappa, no matter how you think of them, it's pretty good. And yeah, this is just a great episode all in all, and hey, I'll be happy to get back in schedule talking about Hell's Paradise, because this was a really fun thing to talk about, right? But this is the end of the episode, but before you go, I just got a few things I want to talk about. Mainly that, yes, me, Glowplasma231, I've got a bunch of other videos up on the channel. I, of course, have all the other previous Hell's Paradise reviews, episodes 1 through 5. A few other anime reviews, of course, I did Chainsaw Man and the first core of Bleach 1000 Year Blood War. I'm going to get to the second core at some point, but as we see how this series went, I think you can tell why it's not been done yet. I also do a lot of other anime and manga related content on the channel, so I talk about Oshinoko Weekly, Weekly Show and Jump, My Hero Academia, and a lot of those other just core anime and manga things that are in right now. So yeah, I do all of that. So if you like this episode, maybe you want to consider liking, subscribe, and doing all that stuff. It really helps me out. And if you really feel like it, I've got a link to my Twitter and Discord in the description down below. Come join either of those communities. We'd be very happy to have you, I should say. And yeah, I don't really have too much to say on our great episode of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku, and I'll be back next time with Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku, episode 7 review. And yeah, another great episode, and thank you guys for watching. This will be Glowplasma231.